So what are some of the ways you can tell that the propaganda against Trump has been, unfortunately, effective? Well, here's one. When people hate Trump and they don't really know why. I come across this frequently, and my favorite is when you ask somebody, they'll have a very specific allegation. Trump is a racist, or Trump is a traitor. And then you'll say, why? And then they'll say something. Usually with Trump as a racist, it'll be because of what he said in Charlottesville. And then I have to explain to them, you've been lied to about that, right? He didn't say that the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville were good people. That's not what happened. I don't know how many people have to argue with about this, but that is the propaganda effect. People hear it. They hear it enough. They think it must be true. There is video. There is a transcript. Listen to it. Watch it. Read it. Very clear. That is not what he was saying. But if you want to decontextualize it, if you want to try to take it out of context, you can probably come up with some way to pretend that people are just not clever enough to understand what he was saying, even though in the same 30 seconds or so, he goes, just to be very clear, the people with the tiki torches are terrible and they're losers and I hate them. But I'm talking about in the debate over pulling down monuments, there are some good people on both sides. That he tried it. But look, one of the issues is that people that hate Trump look for any verbal, what do I call it? Infelicity, some verbal mess ups, and say, well, he's not just speaking the way that Trump speaks. He clearly said something, or he said something that was really bad, even though it wouldn't make any sense for him to say that thing. But people hate Trump and they don't even know why. And that's very disconcerting. That is something that you would expect in an authoritarian country. Why people, whether they're for or against the regime, but they don't know why. They just know that that's what they're supposed to say. And in many cases, now you can get to truly totalitarian governments around the world and throughout history, it's not irrational for them to have that feeling, because the reason that they say it that way, when someone says they love the dear leader in North Korea, they're saying it because they're afraid of what could happen to them if they don't. Some of them probably believe it, and that's just the propaganda effect, but some of them, I'm sure a lot of them, realize you better say you love him or else. Here, we have something of the opposite effect. For most people in the country, especially if you live in a city where you've got Democrat political dominance, and if you don't want to be mobbed on social media, you want people to come after you and say you should be fired and you're terrible and all this stuff. For most people in this country, the easier thing to do, they know, is to just say that Trump is horrible. Like, Trump is basically Hitler. Why? It doesn't matter. They just know that that's the safer position in certainly any blue states or blue cities. And you might say, well, what about Buck, the more Republican-leaning parts of the country? And to that I say, well, the thing with Republicans is you can say whatever you want, and most of us are like, all right, you hate Trump, you love Trump, whatever, let's go get a sandwich. But with liberals, it's, how dare you not hate Trump? Here's just an example of this. And this was making the rounds yesterday on social media. They asked a bunch of I don't even remember where it was. It doesn't matter. A bunch of protesters at some Trump event. And they asked them, why do you hate Trump? And this was, I understand this is just a small sample size. But remember, these are people who are showing up to protest. They are motivated to spend their own time showing how much they hate Trump. So this isn't like a man on the street where you're like, hey, you're walking to go get a latte. What do you think of Trump? And they're like, I don't know. I mean, Trump's okay sometimes. Maybe he's terrible. No, these are people who are holding up placards. We have a point of view that we want people to know. Okay, well, what is that point of view about Trump exactly? Producer Mark, play clip 2, please.
What's the biggest thing that Trump has said? What is the biggest action he's taken that's really pushed you to want to come protest?
The list is endless. I don't think I could come up with a single one.
Can you give me one specific thing that he's done? What's the biggest thing to you specifically he's done?
No, just it's from day one he was just an evil mother.
Well, of course, I'm going to make America great, and that he's going to bring jobs, and that he's taking care of everybody, and that.
Wait, so one of the worst things that he said is.
No, those are the worst things, and also that. When he said that he was going to help the people from Syria and he never did, I thought that was one of the worst things ever.
Just his entire person. the persona that he is, everything about him, just to me. Yes, everything about him. He just lies. Everything he does is.
What's one of the biggest lies that really angered you?
Michael, do you have something?
It starts from the time he is inaugurated, all the way from the crowd size, all the way to, it's a perfect phone call, what he's saying now with his phone call to Zelensky.
Did you read the transcript?
No, I didn't read the transcript, but I've been following it on the news.
Yeah, a lot of really compelling stuff there from those protesters, huh? Essentially, it comes down to Trump is evil. Trump is a bad man. Why is he bad? Oh, Trump lies. What has he lied about? I used to love it. They would do this for a while. The hysterics over at CNN and elsewhere in the mainstream media, they would do this thing where they would say that Trump has lied like 15,000 times. Here are 15,000 Trump lies. They counted them all up. And then you ask somebody, okay, what's the Trump lie that is so odious, so destructive, so bad that people should care? Give me one. What is the Trump lie that I'm supposed to care about, where he lied to me as a voter, as an American, as a citizen, and that was really consequential? I would be curious to know what the answers are. It's certainly not the crowd size at the inauguration. Yeah, did Trump put out little spicy, and did he look like a fool? And but who cares? It's politics. I mean, yeah, they were new to stuff, and they looked, and by the way, they paid a price for that because it looked dumb. Having Spicy come out there and yell and the whole thing. So, okay. And, maybe they did think the crowd size was bigger. Maybe they got a little caught up in their emotions. But saying it's a perfect phone call, that's a judgment call. That's not a lie. So libs need to understand the difference between a judgment call and a lie. They don't. They just like to conflate it all. And you might say, okay, Buck, well, can you think of one big lie that Barack Obama told that affected people and really mattered? Yes, I can, in fact. If you like your healthcare plan, you can keep your healthcare plan. That was an intentional lie told to fool people so that there'd be enough political support to ram through Obamacare, which was supposed to solve the issue of the uninsured in this country. It did not. Supposed to bring down healthcare costs dramatically. If you're in the middle class, guess what? Your healthcare costs have gone up almost 50% in terms of premiums from 2008 to today. There's a new study about that we'll maybe talk about later on in the show. Because guess what Obamacare really did? Took money from people who were working and paying for themselves and transferred it to people who wanted to have a little more help from the government. Redistribution. And not from the rich, not from the fat cats. It was redistribution from people making, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year to people making $25,000 or $30,000 a year in the form of their health care premiums. That's what really happened. But Obama's lie was a big lie. It was a lie told with intent and purpose and affected people, and there were damages from it. What's the big Trump lie? Oh, the crowd size was big. He's told so many thousands of lies, and then you ask, what's the lie that really bothers you the most? What's the Trump thing that really bothers you the most? People have just they turn on the news, they see the newspapers. The tone of the journalist is always dripping with contempt for this president all the time. They don't give him any leeway. There's no good faith in their approach to him. They've had to retract so many stories that were anti-Trump that turned out to be false because anything that's anti-Trump, they just leap on right away. My friends, it's all just absurd. It's absurd. They don't see the absurdity, which is what's really so very troubling. Speaking of absurd, perfect transition. Bro Cuomo. Do you even live, bro? AKA Fredo. AKA I'll wreck your bleep. That guy. I'll wreck your bleep. He kept yelling at that guy who was like a foot shorter than him, who had the brazenness to call him Fredo. Meanwhile, he's gone on radio before. I'm like, yeah, I'm like Fredo. It really is. There are few people who are more entitled and dumber than the children of Democrat politicians who get to go to Ivy League schools and somehow think that they earned it. There are few people in America who are dumber than the children of Democrat politicians who get to waltz into whatever elite institution they want, get whatever job they want, get coddled by the mainstream media, and they think it's because they're good at something. think it's because they're special. Here is Bro Cuomo, who he put down the metrics, weight gainer, and all the rest of it long enough to lift up a phone. He wanted to prove in real time on air, because remember there was this claim made by one of these witnesses that they're in a restaurant and Sondland's on the phone. Ambassador Sondland is on the phone with Trump, and another one of these bureaucrats in Ukraine could hear what Trump was saying to Sondland in a restaurant where there of course is some ambient noise. I don't know how much, but in that restaurant. And here we go. Wasn't on speakerphone. So you got a phone up to his ear, talking to somebody. They say maybe he held a little bit away from his head, but it was just a normal phone call. And another person who's not on the call can hear everything the president's saying. Please play Bro Cuomo's demonstration. Play clip 1.
Very interesting theory from our president that he has really good hearing. Some would say the best hearing ever. And he's never been able to hear a phone call when it wasn't on speakerphone from anybody. So let's just play with that for a second. Mom, can you hear me? All right. So if I were holding the phone here, I'm with Dana Bash. You know how you're always telling me to let her talk because she's so smart and I shouldn't say so much. Can you just say hello? Mom, she probably can't hear me. Mom, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. When you talk to me, I hear you.
I'm talking to you. Say hello to Dana Bash.
Hi, Mrs. Cuomo. How are you?
All right.
So, I can't hear your mother, Chris.
You're over there. So
I'm sitting across the table.
This is not on speakerphone.
I'm sitting across the table.
It's not on speakerphone. It's regular phone. It's 2 feet away from Dana. She can hear my mother. I'm not sure Mom can hear us. Mom, thank you very much. Thank you for not saying anything that'll get me in trouble. I'll call you back.
Hey, it's like I can hear her on the phone. I hear what's going on the phone. Hey. Yeah, she can hear it. Sure she can. Yeah. The other guy's like, nope, can't hear it, dude. So, yeah. By the way, also think about this. You're colleagues with the ambassador, and he's on a phone call with the president. Are you like leaning in, getting all snuggly with him so you can hear this? I don't think that's the case at all. But anyway, Bro Cuomo showing us why he is one of CNN's very finest. There, no surprise.
And so I don't subscribe to that, so I can't even answer a question predicated on that.
There's not bipartisan support.
Well, if the Republicans are in denial about the facts, if the Republicans do not want to honor their oath of office, then I don't think that this we should be characterized as partisan in any way because we are patriotic.
Don't you love it with Nancy Pelosi there? Just make some crap up as you go along. The question's completely legitimate. The question is accurate. The Democrats at the start of this, to make it seem like it was less of a farce, less of a sham, we're saying that they want to make sure they do this all right. They cross the T's and dot the I's because it has to be ultimately bipartisan if you're going to impeach and then remove a president. It can't just be partisan. Guess what? It's entirely partisan. It's like Obamacare, entirely partisan, not a single Republican vote. And so then Nancy Pelosi goes, well, we're not being partisan. We're being patriotic. Oh, that's a cute slogan, Nancy, but the reality is, of course you're being partisans. By definition, this is not a bipartisan effort. Republicans are not voting for this, are not in favor of this, do not support this. This is Democrats, Democrats, Democrats. That's it. So there are facts, there are realities here that she cannot escape. And trying to come up with something cute to say they're on the spot isn't going to cut it, isn't going to change a thing. By the way, there's a great piece on the Federalist, how Republicans won phase one of impeachment, which I think is accurate. And this is a quote from it. Quote, the whistleblower initially suggested a campaign finance violation. Who's been telling you about that? This guy. That morphed into a quid pro quo for military aid to Ukraine, then extortion, then bribery, then obstruction of justice, then back to a quid pro quo, but this time only for a White House meeting. This is called moving the goalposts. This is what someone does when they don't have a strong case to make, when they don't have the goods on somebody, but they insist on forging ahead with it. It is an investigation in search of a crime, not the belief that a crime occurred and then the investigation of it. They're just looking for something. They're just searching around. And this turns all of our ideals about fairness upside down, because the way that our system works, we like to think, is that there has to be a reasonable suspicion of wrongdoing before you start putting somebody through the process of going through their life, going through the stress, the anxiety, the expense of being investigated. No, Democrats just figure they'll use the process. The process is a weapon. The process, as I always say, is the punishment. That's baked into all of this. And you also had, I think Adam Schiff realized that it wasn't a strong week for his whole scam. The scheme here, Schiff was not selling enough ShamWows this week. It did not work for him. But here he is trying to get back to this quid pro quo issue. Play 6, please.
The president says, really quite spontaneously, it's not as if he was asked in this way, no quid pro quo. What do you want from Ukraine? No quid pro quo. This is the I'm not a crook defense. You say it, and I guess that's the end of it. Well, the only thing we can say is that it's not so much that this situation is different in terms of Nixon's conduct and Trump's conduct.
Now, no quid pro quo means quid pro quo. This is the world. If you're going to believe Adam Schiff, if you're going to play by Schiff rules, that's what you're going to be dealing with. Just invert the whole thing, make it up as you go along. He is. You know how I talk about the worst Democrat who's running for president? Schiff is really making a play for the worst Democrat member of Congress, which is an impressive feat because, man, there are some Democrats who are unethical, stupid, and really annoying who hold elected office in Congress. There's a lot of them. But Schiff has reached a level of disgrace and dishonesty that it would almost be impressive if it wasn't so horrifying.
In 2011, in November 2011, I actually sat next to Vladimir Putin at a conference in which he made precisely that point. It was the first time that he had actually done so to a group of American journalists and experts who were brought to something called the Valdai Discussion Club. So he started in 2011 making it very clear that he saw American fracking as a great threat to Russian interests. We were all struck by how much he stressed this issue, and it's since 2011 and since that particular juncture that Putin has made a big deal of this.
That's the most interesting thing that Fiona Hill said yesterday, this expert on Ukraine from National Security Council. A lot of big egos, by the way, academics with big egos at the NSC. I've spent some time, briefed people over there, spent time over there back in my government days. And this was the single most worthwhile thing. And, of course, the media is not focused on this at all. But I've told you here before on the show, those of you who have been listening to me for a while know that the revolution in fracking, in really the utilization and the refinement of fracking. Fracking as a technology has been around since at least I think the 1920s, the 1930s. It's been around a long time. But it has been used in the last 10 or 15 years in ways that have completely revolutionized our output of oil and natural gas. I mean, the fracking is a true game changer. And because of that additional capacity from the United States as well as on the world market, it has kept the price of fossil fuels down, which has made it harder for regimes like Venezuela and Iran and Russia to have the inflated national treasuries to cause problems for us all over the world, because we have a big, we have all this oil and we have a really dynamic and successful economy. These other countries, they're one-trick ponies, right? Russia, it's oil and natural gas. If cousin Yuri doesn't own the natural gas company, you're not going to be a billionaire. right? That's just not going to happen. No one's starting some amazing tech company there. In Venezuela, there are other countries as well, all across the Middle East, the countries that rely the most on oil. The Saudis are a little less pushy than they used to be because they don't have quite the same leverage that they did before. It's certainly true of Iran. It's been hard for Iraq because Iraq really depends on oil for its to pay its debts as a country and for its revenue, but it's really hurt Putin. And I just want to point out that if the left had their way, natural gas and oil fracking would have been banned. Banned. There was that idiot, looks like Pajama Boy, but with glasses, who made the movie about fracking was going to poison us all and drink the water, and the water's catching on fire, and fracking is going to kill everybody. Imagine if people had listened to this, and I'm an expert, and I know, and I made this. I think that movie, by the way, I think it might have gotten the Academy Award for Best Documentary, which just Academy Awards for Best Documentary, not that who cares about the Oscars anymore anyway, but it is an interesting indicator. It goes to the most left-wing out there. It has to be something that comes straight from the pages of Slate or The Nation or Vox.com or something. That's the positioning if you want to get an Academy Award for Best Documentary. It's the most left-wing even of the various Oscars that go out. But I just think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that here we are, and we are being told by Fiona Hill that natural gas fracking was something that was a game changer, and libs all oppose this in this country, and now we just act like we've moved on. Who was right, who was wrong about it? We need to take stock of these things. The anti-fracking people that were saying it was terrifying, it was going to poison us all, they didn't know what the heck they were talking about. So just start with that. And then we had, speaking of being wrong on things, this was also fun. Fiona Hill wrote an op-ed, I think in the Washington Post some years ago, during the Obama administration, saying that we shouldn't give, essentially parroting the line of that administration, which is, remember, now it's all, oh my gosh, Ukraine, and they're fighting Russia, and this is our duty to help them, and why aren't we doing more? And Trump has been doing a lot to help them. Obama wasn't doing squat. Obama was not helping them in the way that they needed help. I mean, yeah, send them, what they're calling it, blanket aid, I think now, send them non-lethal aid. They're in a war. They need stuff to fight back against the enemy. Remember, during the Obama administration, the invasion of eastern Ukraine, the seizure of Crimea, the shooting down of MH17 with Russian missile in eastern Ukraine killed almost 300 people. Where were all the people that are now on TV? Oh my gosh, it's such a national security interest, Ukraine. And what? Those people, including Fiona Hill, were saying, whoa, let's not get crazy. Let's not send any weapons. Well, we don't want to get too into this thing. These people are frauds. Frauds. Oh, they're such experts in Ukraine, such experts in diplomacy and foreign policy. Yeah? They weren't experts in how to stop the Ukrainians from getting their heads kicked in by the Russians. Obama administration, the Obama administration dithered and had the media cover for it all the time. Dithering was considered thinking things through, being a grand strategist. So you sit around like, well, I don't know if we're going to do this thing or that thing or this thing. It was being contemplative, introspective, and all these fancy words for not doing anything. Obama dithered on Syria, Obama dithered. And the places where he took action, by the way. Libya, that didn't turn out so well. Pulling all the troops out of Iraq, that didn't turn out so well. Escalation in Afghanistan. I'm just go down the list. But in these other challenging areas, we don't know what to do. We don't know how we're going to figure this out. But Hill wrote this editorial about how, and it was just giving support in public for the Obama administration's policy, because what do you do if you're at the NSC? You want to have access. You want to be at the table with the decision makers, and you want to be at the cocktail party in Georgetown, which is a real thing. Don't listen to these people that keep saying, oh, there's no such thing. There are fancy cocktail parties with the libs in Georgetown. I've seen them. I've been to a couple. Not because I'm invited. I sneak in. Usually someone's like, hey, you're fun. I'm going to bring you. And then I'm like, they better hope they don't figure out who this is, because the libs do not like Mr. Sexton. That's not true. Some of them do. So Hill took this position, even though it would seem so obvious that what you really want to have would be a military support to the Ukrainians to fight back against the Russians. And when she was asked, well, why didn't you know this then? She goes, oh, I changed my mind. I'm trying to do a little bit of a Hill there. But, she did this whole yeah, I guess I was just wrong then. Oh, well, I'm so glad we have the woman who was just wrong on probably the single most consequential decision. Remember this. Ukraine's being invaded by the Russians, being carved up. Ukrainian paramilitaries with Russian backing, Russian armor, Russian tanks, seizing parts of the country. They've already taken Crimea through this referendum, and they're coming in through the east. And what does the Obama administration do? Sanctions, talk to people in the EU. Oh, the Russians are so mean. Russia needs to stop, and let's send over MREs and blankets to the Ukrainians. That's great. Really good job, guys. Really, give yourself a round of applause. Well done. And now they want to just hammer and really slander Trump on Ukraine policy as if these are individuals who are really in any position whatsoever to be telling us what would be best in Ukraine. That their judgment hadn't been already shown to be lacking. That's a kind way of putting it. Also, though, Fiona Hill, from what I understand, worked for a Soros-backed foundation at one point, folks.
Yes, George Soros. I remember when I was at the Blaze, we would have the Soros. There was a character on the cartoon called a Spooky Dude, and they had a whole cartoon, and it was all Soros, and he was flying around and trying to spread the Open Society Foundation and undermine democracy and one world government. Here is Fiona Hill when she's asked about George Soros. Play 4.
These different theories, these conspiracy theories that have been targeting you, spun in part by folks like Mr. Stone, as well as fueled by Rudy Giuliani and others, basically have a tinge of anti-Semitism to them at least?
Well, certainly when they involve George Soros, they do. I'd just like to point out that in the early 1900s, the Tsarist secret police produced something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which actually you can still obtain on the internet, and you can buy it actually sometimes in bookshops in Russia and elsewhere. This is the longest-running anti-Semitic trope that we have in history. And the trope against Mr. Soros, George Soros, was also created for political purposes. And this is the new Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I'd actually intended to write something about this before I was actually invited to come into the administration because it's an absolute outrage.
I just want to know, does that mean you can't criticize George Soros now? Because George Soros is a very politically active billionaire who funds all kinds of organizations, including really horrible organizations, Media Matters and these things. I mean, these get Soros money. Very bad stuff going on as a result of the money going into some of these organizations. You look at what George Soros is funding, and he's making an impact, all right, a very negative one for this country, for liberty, for individual rights. And now to criticize Soros that's anti-Semitism. You always have to wonder when people start to fall back immediately on, oh, it's racist to criticize Obama. No, it's not racist to criticize Obama. If you're criticizing Obama on his policies or what he does, that's completely fine, right? It's racist to be racist. It's anti-Semitic to be anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic to criticize George Soros. George Soros involves himself in very contentious issues all over the world and is an incredibly wealthy guy. So why fall back on this? It just seems so lazy. And I'm not talking, just like Alex Jones and other people. Do they say crazy things about Soros? Of course, but they say crazy things about everybody. Doesn't make it okay, but it just means that's not a particularly noteworthy point here. So I think it was interesting that Fiona Hill worked, I should check, might have been Brookings, which does get, I believe, a fair amount of funding from Soros and Open Society Foundation. I have to check into it. But see, part of this is that they make it hard to find it out. They like to hide where the money's coming from. And I think, let me see, does Soros fund, I just want to make sure before I, Media Matters has a policy of not not listing its donors. Oh, yeah, Soros has donated a ton. Media Matters is like the worst organization in America. I mean, it's disgusting, and anybody who works there should be ashamed of what they do every day for a living. Yeah, Soros money. That's all I have to know. If you're giving money to Media Matters, you are the enemy of all decent, freedom-loving people around the world. So there we have. I just want to make sure I got that one right. The Buck archives rarely fail me. All right, here's a story from the Daily Signal I wanted to bring your attention earlier this week. An Illinois school district has ruled that transgender students will have unrestricted access to bathrooms of their choice. The school district held a meeting at Palatine High School in Northwest Illinois where board members voted to give unrestricted locker room and restroom access to transgender students. The board voted for the decision with a meeting of almost 500 people present. Quote, students shall be treated and supported in a manner consistent with their gender identity, which shall include students having access to restrooms and locker rooms that correspond to their gender identity. This comes after 4 years of fighting over this one. Sure enough, here we are. The policy comes down from the school, and transgender students, a 14-year-old boy wants to go into the girls' locker room and change with the girls in the girls' locker room. What a shock that in Illinois they decide that that's the way it's going to be. Interesting here that we always are told about the harm, the psychological harm that a person who believes that it's usually a he that believes it's a she, but I know it can be the other way too. But that a person who, when it comes to these bathroom policy things, at least from the stories that I've seen, I don't know if there's official numbers on this, but it's usually that there's someone who claims that they would be deeply psychologically harmed, that there would be there's a sense of lack of safety and lack of acceptance if a biological male cannot use the bathroom and locker rooms and shower rooms and things like that of biological females. But one thing that I thought was interesting is that in this case, they did some interviews, and you had a transgender student there who's like, this is a victory for my rights, and of course, which is what we knew that a transgender student who's fighting for this would say. But remember, we are told that really, if you think that if you're not willing to make this accommodation, which is a very gentle way of putting it, if you're not willing to make this policy change for the transgender student, why are you being so mean? Why can't you be more? And whenever someone says, why are you being mean? I mean, if I'm involved in the discussion, I think, am I being mean? I mean, I don't want to be mean, right? It puts you a little bit on deep. Why would you be so mean to somebody? Just wants to use the other bathroom. It shouldn't be a big issue, right? Right? What's the cost? What's the worst thing? Why won't you let this person? And you get emotionally pushed into saying, all right, fine, I get, maybe. And some of you are like, I'll never get emotionally pushed. But you know what I mean? That's the plan. That's the idea. Meanwhile, what about the young girls that now are going to have to change for sports? In some cases, they will be fully unclothed, and they'll be young teenagers, 13, 14, 15 years old. And they're going to have someone next to them who has male body parts, just a fact, and they're supposed to. So they're supposed to be fine with this. Some of them aren't fine with it. It turns out. Here's a teenage girl who was at this meeting, play 19.
I feel uncomfortable that my privacy is being invaded. As I am a swimmer, I do change multiple times naked in front of the other students in the locker room, and I understand that the board has an obligation to all students, but I was hoping that they would go about this in a different way that would also accommodate students such as myself.
Accommodate students such as herself. Why isn't that the case? Why can't they take that approach? I think it's very interesting here that you have such a lack of focus on the cost to this young girl and other girls like her, who they feel put upon by this. They feel maybe a little unsafe, a little scared. Usually, the left is always the woman's feelings very, very important, and women need to be protected and defended, and at least on from the patriarchy and from unequal pay, right? Usually, though, they're very sensitive to women's feelings. But what you don't tend to hear, what does not tend to get discussed, is when women in this, a young woman in this case, has a feeling of violation from this policy. And any person would naturally understand that a girl who's grown up as a girl and has had understands the difference between men and women, and these are people who are in high school and people are going through puberty, and there's a lot of stuff that is going on here. And they're going to have boys next to them changing, and they say, why can't the girls just accept it? Why are they such bigots? They'll even say, and why would any bigoted parents have a problem with this? Okay, why do we have to have the transgender kid changing in the bed? It's just about bending the knee and doing what they tell you have to do. That's what it really is. If you look at who is suffering more, how hard is it really for the student with the male biology to be around other students with male biology and changing? No, you have to have the affirmation of this. And it doesn't matter what the cost, the psychological costs and consequences are to young women. That's irrelevant, because there's an agenda here, and the authoritarian left wants you to know you bend the knee or you're a bigot. Your 14-year-old daughter has to have a 14-year-old boy getting completely naked next to her at school. And if that isn't okay with you, you're a bad person. You're a bad person. This is where this has all gone now. And by the way, they're going to start to change laws and say this is a discrimination issue. And even speaking about this, that's the step that they're going to go to next. To even suggest there's a problem with this is like suggesting that we should have, segregated water fountains again. It's just like racism. This is not just like racism. The left tries to say that. It is not just like racism. But the left lies a lot.